Sometimes the kindest man in the room is the one everyone mistakes for the weakest. Rain hammered against the cracked pavement outside Miller's truck stop just off Highway 81, the kind of cold Nebraska rain that soaked through denim in seconds and turned the air silver beneath the glow of flickering gas station lights. A black Cadillac Eldorado sat crooked near pump number 4, steam curling from beneath the hood like a dying breath. Men in polished loafers stood nearby under the awning, laughing softly into paper coffee cups while expensive watches flashed beneath the fluorescent lights. And beside the car stood a woman who clearly did not belong in a place like this. Vivian Sterling kept one hand on the edge of the hood while the wind tugged strands of dark hair across her face. Her charcoal coat probably cost more than most people's monthly rent in Pine Hollow, but there was nothing proud in the way she stood there now. Just tired. Quietly tired. "Looks like that beauty finally gave up on you," one man called with a smirk. Another chuckled, probably overloaded with California software nonsense. Vivian ignored them. Her eyes stayed on the engine bay, focused, distant, almost guarded. Then came the sound of an old pickup rolling across wet gravel. The truck looked like it had survived 3 wars and a tornado. Rust lined the wheel wells. One headlight flickered weakly, and behind the wheel sat Ethan Brooks. He parked slowly beside the Cadillac and stepped out into the rain wearing a faded work jacket stained with grease and motor oil. Water dripped from the brim of his old baseball cap as he walked toward the car carrying nothing but a dented metal toolbox. One of the businessmen laughed under his breath. "Great," he muttered. "Now the local YouTube mechanic's here." A few quiet snickers followed. Ethan didn't react. He simply crouched near the front bumper and listened. Not to the people, to the engine. Rain tapped softly against the hood while trucks hissed past on the highway beyond the station. Vivian studied him carefully. Most men looked at her clothes first, or her face, or the car. Ethan looked at the machine like it mattered more than impressing anyone around him. "Battery?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head once. "No, ma'am." His voice was calm, low, steady like distant thunder rolling across flat country fields. He opened the hood fully and reached inside with weathered hands that moved with practiced confidence. "Fuel line's fine too," he murmured. One businessman scoffed loudly. "Buddy, that car's worth more than your truck." Ethan kept working. No pride, no embarrassment, just focus. Vivian folded her arms against the cold. "Can you fix it?" she asked. Ethan paused. His fingers brushed a small black wire hidden near the ignition assembly. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he looked up at her for the first time. Rainwater traced slowly down the side of his face beneath the gas station lights. "This engine isn't broken," he said quietly. "Somebody wanted you stranded." The laughter stopped. Completely. Even the highway beyond them suddenly seemed quieter somehow. Vivian stared at him without blinking while the rain continued falling around the lonely truck stop like the world itself was holding its breath. The men beneath the awning stopped smiling after that. One slowly lowered his coffee cup while another glanced nervously toward the Cadillac as if the car itself had suddenly become something dangerous. Vivian stepped closer to Ethan, her heels clicking softly against the wet concrete. "What do you mean somebody wanted me stranded?" she asked. Ethan carefully pulled the thin black wire free from beneath the ignition housing and held it up beneath the fluorescent lights. Rainwater dripped from his fingertips. "This is not factory installed," he said calmly. "It is a remote fuel interruption switch. Cheap job too. Whoever put it here only needed your car to die for about 30 minutes. One of the businessmen scoffed weakly. "You figured all that out in 60 seconds. Ethan shrugged lightly. "Closer to 40. The wind swept colder through the truck stop parking lot. Somewhere down the highway a freight truck groaned through the rain like distant thunder rolling over empty plains. Vivian stared at the wire in silence. Not fear. Not panic. Something heavier. Recognition. Ethan noticed it immediately, but he did not pry. Men with dignity understood something important. Sometimes silence was another form of kindness. He reached back into the engine compartment and reconnected the proper ignition line with careful, steady hands. No dramatic movements. No need to impress anyone. The engine turned over smoothly on the first try, the deep hum of the Cadillac vibrating softly beneath the rain. One of the men under the awning muttered, "Lucky guess." Ethan closed the hood gently. "No," he replied without looking up. "Just experience." Vivian folded her arms against the cold wind and studied him again. There was something unusual about the mechanic standing in front of her. Not confidence exactly. Confidence usually begged to be noticed. Ethan Brooks carried himself like a man who no longer needed permission to know his own worth. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Ethan wiped rainwater from his hands using an old shop rag hanging from his back pocket. "Nothing." Vivian frowned slightly. "You drove out here in a storm." "Still nothing." One of the businessmen laughed quietly. "You are turning down money from a woman driving a $150,000 Cadillac." Ethan finally looked at him. Calm, respectful, completely unshaken. "Not every good thing needs a receipt." The man fell silent. Vivian lowered her eyes for a moment as though that sentence had reached somewhere deeper than she expected. Then she opened her purse and pulled out a business card. Thick black cardstock. Silver lettering. She handed it toward him. Ethan glanced at it briefly but did not react. Most people in Nebraska would have recognized the Sterling name instantly. Sterling Crown Hotels owned towers from Manhattan to Los Angeles. But Ethan only tucked the card into his jacket pocket without reading the title beneath her name. Vivian noticed that too. And strangely, it unsettled her more than the sabotage. "You should probably get somewhere safe tonight," Ethan said quietly. "Whoever did this may still be nearby." "You sound very certain." Ethan looked toward the highway where rain blurred the red taillights passing through the darkness. "People who want attention break things loudly," he said. "People who plan ahead make sure nobody notices until later." Vivian held his gaze for a long moment. Then for the first time all night, her expression softened slightly. Not toward the mechanic. Toward the man hidden underneath him. Somewhere beyond the storm, something quiet had already begun to change. 3 days later, the rain was gone, but the sky above Pine Hollow still carried the pale gray color of unfinished storms. The morning air smelled like wet cedar and gasoline as Ethan Brooks rolled open the garage doors at Brooks Auto and Machine just before sunrise. The old building groaned softly as cold wind drifted through the rafters. Most people in town barely noticed the place anymore. The faded sign out front leaned slightly to one side, and one of the neon letters had burned out sometime during the previous winter. But inside, everything was clean, organized, quiet. Ethan believed dignity lived in small details. A wrench returned to its proper hook. Floors swept before sunrise. Coffee brewed before Lucy woke up for school. He moved slowly around the garage now, adjusting tools beneath the hum of fluorescent lights while an old country station crackled softly from a dusty radio near the workbench. Outside, tires crunched across gravel. Ethan glanced toward the window just as the black Cadillac rolled into the lot again. He paused for half a second before returning calmly to the carburetor resting on his bench. Vivian Sterling stepped out wearing dark jeans this time instead of designer slacks. Simpler, softer somehow, but nothing about her carried weakness. Even in silence, she moved like someone used to rooms stopping when she entered them. Ethan wiped his hands on a clean rag as she approached. "Morning," he said simply. Vivian looked around the garage slowly. Her eyes lingered on the polished tools, the old photographs hanging beside a shelf of engine manuals, and finally on the small backpack sitting near a stool by the office door. A pink keychain dangled from the zipper. "You have a daughter," she said quietly. Ethan nodded once. "Lucy, 8 years old." Vivian smiled faintly. "That explains the unicorn lunchbox." Ethan glanced toward the office corner. "She says unicorns are underappreciated." To his surprise, Vivian laughed softly. Not the polished social laugh he imagined she used in corporate rooms. A real one. Brief, warm, almost unfamiliar to her own ears. "She sounds smarter than most adults I know," Vivian admitted. The garage fell quiet again except for the low ticking sound of cooling engines and the distant whistle of a freight train somewhere beyond town. Ethan noticed the Cadillac this time. "Car running okay?" Vivian hesitated. "Actually, I came because something else feels off." Ethan walked outside with her toward the car. The Nebraska wind carried dry leaves across the gravel while sunlight spilled weakly over the fields beyond town. Vivian leaned lightly against the hood as Ethan listened near the engine compartment again. "Transmission timing," he said after a moment. "Nothing dangerous." Vivian folded her arms. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan looked up. "Sure." She studied him carefully. "How does a mechanic in a town this small know what a sabotage switch looks like?" Ethan returned his attention to the engine. "Spent a lot of years fixing things that mattered. Military? She asked softly. Ethan tightened a bolt without answering immediately. Then finally, long time ago. Vivian nodded slowly. She understood avoidance when she heard it. Rich people hid secrets with lawyers and headlines. Men like Ethan hid them with silence. The wind stirred through the open garage doors behind them. Somewhere inside, a child's drawing taped to the office wall fluttered gently in the breeze. Vivian noticed it. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. One figure had angel wings. Ethan followed her eyes, but said nothing. Your wife? Vivian asked carefully. Ethan's hands became still for just a second. Lucy's mom passed away 4 years ago. The words were calm, but grief lingered quietly beneath them like an old scar beneath skin. Vivian lowered her gaze. I am sorry. Ethan nodded politely. Life keeps moving. But Vivian could already tell something important about Ethan Brooks. He was not a man who survived pain by becoming colder. Somehow, impossibly, he had survived by becoming gentler. By Friday evening, the entire town of Pine Hollow seemed wrapped in gold autumn light and drifting with smoke. Main Street buzzed with pickup trucks, football banners, and the slow, familiar rhythm of small-town life settling into weekend comfort. Ethan Brooks stood beneath the open hood of an aging Ford Ranger outside his garage, while country music drifted softly from the radio inside. The air smelled like motor oil, cold leaves, and distant barbecue smoke from the diner across the street. Lucy sat near the office doorway, finishing homework with her tongue pressed against the corner of her mouth in concentration. Every few minutes, she glanced up at her father the way children do when one person is their whole world. Daddy, she called softly. Do you think unicorns would survive winter in Nebraska? Ethan tightened a bolt carefully. Only the tough ones. Lucy smiled proudly. Then mine definitely would. The quiet moment lasted exactly 12 seconds before the deep growl of luxury engines rolled across the gravel lot outside the garage. Ethan looked up slowly. 3 black SUVs pulled in one after another, polished like mirrors beneath the setting sun. Men in expensive coats stepped out first, scanning the area with practiced impatience. Then came the final car. A silver Aston Martin with custom plates. Daniel Mercer stepped out, adjusting the cufflinks beneath his tailored charcoal coat. Tall, controlled, handsome in the kind of way money carefully maintains. He surveyed the garage like someone evaluating damaged property. Lucy instinctively lowered her pencil. Ethan wiped his hands calmly on a rag and walked forward. Can I help you? Daniel glanced briefly at Ethan's oil-stained jacket before smiling faintly. Not warmly. You are Brooks. Depends who is asking. One of the men behind Daniel chuckled quietly. Daniel stepped closer. Daniel Mercer. Mercer Automotive Group. Ethan nodded once. The name meant something even in small towns. Billion-dollar electric luxury vehicles. National commercials. Magazine covers. Your people called earlier about a transmission issue, Ethan said. Daniel removed his gloves slowly. Actually, I came because someone keeps recommending your little garage. The word little lingered deliberately. Vivian stepped out from the passenger side of the Aston Martin before Ethan could answer. The moment Daniel noticed her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Controlled surprise. Then irritation. Vivian, he said smoothly. I did not realize you were here. Vivian closed the car door quietly behind her. Clearly, Ethan's eyes shifted subtly between them. Not jealousy. Observation. Daniel smiled again, but there was tension beneath it now. Interesting place, he said while looking around the garage. Very rustic. Lucy frowned slightly from the office doorway. Ethan remained calm. Cars do not care what the building looks like. One of Daniel's associates laughed under his breath. That explains this place then. Vivian's expression cooled immediately. Ethan ignored the comment completely and walked toward the Aston Martin. What seems to be the issue? Daniel followed him slowly. Dashboard calibration keeps failing. Ethan leaned inside the vehicle briefly, studying the digital console. The screens flickered once. Then again. His expression sharpened almost invisibly. Who installed your aftermarket security layer? Daniel crossed his arms. My lead engineers. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Then they should not have. Silence. One of the suited men scoffed softly. Daniel's smile thinned. Excuse me. Ethan stepped back from the car. The firewall is conflicting with the vehicle processor. Whoever built this system knows software, not engines. Daniel stared at him for a moment longer than necessary. The garage suddenly felt smaller somehow. Even the wind outside seemed quieter. Vivian watched Ethan carefully now, not with curiosity anymore, with growing realization. Because Daniel Mercer employed some of the best automotive engineers in America, and the mechanic standing in front of him had diagnosed the problem in under 30 seconds. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, wrapping Pine Hollow in cold blue shadows and the soft orange glow of streetlights reflecting off damp pavement. Inside Brooks Auto and Machine, the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobody laughed anymore. Daniel Mercer stood beside the Aston Martin with his jaw tight, while Ethan leaned halfway into the driver's side dashboard, studying streams of diagnostic data flickering across the digital display. The low hum of processors filled the garage along with the faint scent of engine heat and machine oil. Vivian remained near the office doorway beside Lucy, watching quietly. Even Lucy seemed to sense something important was happening. "Daddy looks serious," she whispered softly. Vivian folded her arms gently. "Your father seems serious about everything." Lucy smiled faintly. "Not pancakes." Vivian almost laughed again. Almost. Across the garage, Daniel's lead engineer stepped forward holding a tablet. Young, expensively educated, the kind of man who trusted credentials more than instinct. "Our team already rebuilt the firewall architecture twice," he said carefully. "There should not be any processor conflict." Ethan did not look up. "There is. That is impossible." Ethan typed 3 quick commands into the dashboard console. The Aston Martin screens instantly stabilized. Error messages vanished one by one. Silence spread through the garage. Even the old radio near the office seemed quieter now beneath the fluorescent hum overhead. The engineer blinked. "How did you even find that?" Ethan stepped back slowly. "Your system is routing through a secondary European encryption layer." Daniel frowned immediately. "That software is proprietary." Ethan nodded once. "Designed in Munich about 6 years ago." The engineer stared at him. "You know German encryption architecture?" Ethan reached for a wrench calmly. "I know bad engineering when I see it." One of Daniel's associates scoffed softly from near the garage door. "Who are you exactly?" Ethan ignored the question. He opened the hood and adjusted a small processor housing beneath the engine compartment with careful precision. Vivian watched the movement of his hands closely now. Steady. Exact. Confident without performance. Men like Daniel demanded attention when they entered a room. Ethan somehow commanded silence instead. "Try it now," Ethan said. Daniel slid reluctantly into the driver's seat and pressed the ignition. The Aston Martin came alive instantly. Smooth. Perfect. The dashboard glowed without a single warning light. The engineer grabbed the tablet again, eyes widening. Processor latency just dropped by 40%. Daniel slowly stepped back out of the vehicle. The cold wind outside rattled the loose garage signs softly against the building while nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Daniel forced a thin smile. "Impressive." Ethan wiped his hands calmly with a rag. "Not really. Just needed simplifying." Daniel studied him more carefully now, irritation slowly mixing with suspicion. "You talk like somebody who has worked with systems bigger than this garage." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Cars are cars." "No," Daniel replied quietly. "They are not." The tension in the room shifted again. Vivian could feel it. Daniel Mercer was not threatened by mechanics. He was threatened by men he could not immediately place above or beneath himself. Lucy climbed off her stool and walked toward her father holding a small paper bag. "You forgot dinner again," she said softly. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Gentler. Warmer. He knelt beside her. "Sorry, Bug." She handed him the sandwich carefully wrapped in foil. "Turkey this time. Not peanut butter." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then today is already improving." Vivian watched the moment in silence. There it was again. The thing money could not imitate. Quiet goodness without audience. Daniel noticed Vivian watching Ethan, and something cold flickered briefly behind his eyes. "Interesting mechanic you found," he said to her. Vivian met his gaze calmly. "Interesting man." Daniel buttoned his coat slowly while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Then his eyes returned to Ethan one final time. "There is a charity gala in Lincoln tomorrow night," he said evenly. "Investors, press, automotive executives." Ethan kept eating half his sandwich while Lucy leaned quietly against his shoulder. Daniel smiled faintly. "You should come see what the real world looks like." The garage fell completely silent. After the SUVs disappeared into the cold Nebraska night, Silence settled slowly back over the garage like snowfall covering old ground. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, while Ethan locked the front office door and turned the sign from open to closed. Outside, the wind pushed dry leaves across Main Street in restless little circles. Lucy sat cross-legged on the workbench, swinging her feet gently, while Ethan cleaned tools beneath the yellow glow of a hanging lamp. "Daddy," she asked carefully, "was that rich guy trying to be mean?" Ethan paused for a moment before placing a wrench back onto its hook. Sometimes people who have everything still do not know how to talk to others. Lucy frowned thoughtfully. "That sounds lonely." Ethan smiled faintly to himself. Children often understood things adults complicated. The garage door rattled softly, then rolled upward again before Ethan could answer. Vivian stepped inside, carrying a paper coffee tray with steam rising into the cold air around her. Ethan looked mildly surprised. "Thought you already left town." Vivian handed Lucy a cup of hot chocolate first. "I realized I never thanked your assistant properly." Lucy grinned immediately. "I'm head of customer relations." Vivian laughed softly while Ethan shook his head. That title came with a $7 allowance increase. The warmth between them felt natural now, dangerous in its own quiet way. Vivian handed Ethan a black coffee. "No sugar," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. "How did you know?" "You look like a man who thinks sweet coffee is a character flaw." Ethan actually laughed under his breath at that. Small, brief, but real. Vivian noticed immediately. It changed his whole face somehow. Softer around the eyes. Younger than grief usually allowed. The wind outside groaned against the garage walls while Lucy wandered into the office carrying her hot chocolate like precious treasure. For a few moments, only the ticking sound of cooling engines filled the room. Vivian leaned lightly against the workbench. "You are not what you pretend to be," she said quietly. Ethan kept wiping down a socket wrench without looking up. "And what do I pretend to be? A small-town mechanic?" Ethan nodded once. "That part is true." Vivian studied him carefully beneath the hanging shop light. Men do not casually diagnose encrypted European automotive systems unless they spent years around high-level engineering. Ethan finally looked at her. Calm as ever. "You investigated me." "I tried." Her expression shifted slightly. "There is almost nothing to find." Ethan leaned back against the workbench slowly. "That was intentional." Vivian waited. Something about him invited honesty without demanding it. Eventually, Ethan glanced toward the old photograph hanging near the office doorway. A younger version of himself stood beside a smiling woman holding a baby wrapped in pink blankets. The picture was faded around the edges now. "My wife got sick," he said quietly. The humor disappeared from the room instantly. A rare neurological condition. Treatment was expensive. Vivian lowered her eyes. Ethan continued calmly, though grief moved beneath every word like distant thunder beneath still skies. "Before this garage, I designed military mobility systems. Hybrid processors. Vehicle defense architecture." Vivian stared at him in disbelief. "For who?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "Whoever signed the contracts." "You sold the patents?" "Every one of them." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while cold wind pressed softly against the windows. Vivian looked at the worn garage around her again. The old heater, the patched ceiling, the faded work boots near the office desk. "You gave all of it up?" Ethan nodded once. "Money bought us 4 more years together." Silence followed. Heavy. Sacred somehow. Vivian felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. In her world, people chased wealth like oxygen. They protected it, worshipped it, built entire lives around never losing it. But the man standing in front of her had traded brilliance, recognition, and fortune for more bedtime stories with the woman he loved. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee. "Best investment I ever made." Vivian looked at him, then with something deeper than admiration. Something quieter. More dangerous. Respect. Saturday night arrived wrapped in cold rain and city lights. Lincoln glowed against the dark Nebraska sky like another world entirely, all polished glass towers and black luxury sedans sliding silently through wet downtown streets. Ethan Brooks sat stiffly behind the wheel of his old pickup truck beneath the towering entrance of the Sterling Grand Hotel, while windshield wipers dragged slowly across the glass. Beside him, Lucy stared upward in amazement at the building disappearing into the clouds above them. "Daddy," she whispered, "this place looks like a castle for billionaires." Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his old charcoal suit jacket. It was clean, pressed carefully, but worn at the elbows if someone looked close enough. Then we should probably avoid touching expensive things. Lucy giggled softly. Vivian stood beneath the glowing hotel entrance waiting for them, elegant in a deep midnight blue gown that moved like liquid beneath the falling rain. Cameras flashed nearby as investors and executives climbed marble steps under giant crystal chandeliers. Yet when she saw Ethan's truck pull in, her attention shifted completely. For one brief moment, the noise around her disappeared. Ethan stepped out first and opened Lucy's door carefully. He had polished Lucy's little black shoes twice before leaving Pine Hollow. Vivian noticed that too. She noticed everything about him now. Daniel Mercer appeared near the entrance holding a glass of champagne, while several executives surrounded him laughing politely at something he had said. The moment he spotted Ethan, his smile changed subtly. Sharper. Well, Daniel announced loudly enough for others nearby to hear. Looks like Nebraska sent us its finest mechanic. A few people chuckled under their breath. Ethan simply took Lucy's hand. Evening. Daniel glanced at the old pickup truck still idling near the curb. You actually drove that here? Lucy frowned immediately. Vivian's expression cooled, but Ethan only nodded once. Still runs. That is one way to measure success, Daniel replied smoothly. Several nearby investors laughed again. The rain tapped softly against the giant hotel windows while waiters moved through the lobby carrying silver trays beneath golden light. Ethan remained completely calm. That seemed to bother Daniel more than anger would have. Vivian stepped closer beside Ethan. He is my guest. Daniel lifted his glass slightly. Of course he is. The ballroom doors opened behind them, revealing enormous crystal chandeliers glowing above hundreds of guests dressed in silk and black tuxedos. Music drifted softly through the marble lobby while reporters photographed executives near a massive sterling crown backdrop covered in sponsor logos. Lucy squeezed Ethan's hand tighter. Everybody looks rich, she whispered. Ethan leaned closer to her. Money is not the same thing as character, bug. Vivian heard him. So did Daniel. Inside the ballroom, conversations gradually softened as Ethan walked through the crowd beside Vivian. Men glanced briefly at his worn shoes. Women noticed the faded pickup keys still clipped to his belt. A few people smiled politely. Others did not bother hiding their judgment. Ethan seemed untouched by all of it. He carried himself the same way he did inside his small garage back home. Quietly, steadily, like dignity was something nobody else could give or take away. Daniel watched him carefully from across the room while a famous automotive journalist approached. Daniel, the reporter said excitedly, is it true Mercer Automotive plans to unveil the new adaptive processor tonight? Daniel smiled confidently. Absolutely. Most advanced vehicle intelligence platform in the country. The giant projector screens around the ballroom suddenly lit up with the Mercer Company logo while applause echoed softly through the hall. Waiters paused. Investors turned toward the stage. Cameras lifted. Daniel stepped toward the microphone beneath the chandeliers with polished confidence. Tonight, he announced proudly, we present the future of automotive engineering. Then the main display behind him flickered once. Twice. The lights across the ballroom dimmed unexpectedly. Several screens glitched into static. A murmur spread through the crowd immediately. Daniel's smile disappeared. The ballroom shifted from celebration to confusion in less than 10 seconds. Crystal chandeliers dimmed overhead, while giant projector screens flickered between static and broken code. A nervous murmur rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. Investors checked phones. Executives whispered urgently into headsets. Daniel Mercer stood frozen beside the microphone, forcing a smile that no longer reached his eyes. Just a minor technical delay, he announced quickly. But the massive presentation screen behind him suddenly flashed bright red warning symbols before going completely black. Silence spread wider this time. Vivian glanced toward Ethan instinctively. He was already watching the stage with narrowed eyes, calm beneath the chaos. Lucy tugged softly on his sleeve. Daddy, she whispered. The room feels scared. Ethan looked down briefly. People get nervous when expensive things stop working. Near the stage, Daniel's engineering team rushed between equipment tables while cameras from business reporters continued recording every second. One executive hissed under his breath, the live investors are still connected online. Another muttered, The processor demo is crashing the entire network. Daniel turned sharply toward his lead engineer. Fix it. We are trying. Try faster. The room buzzed with growing tension beneath the soft clinking of untouched champagne glasses. Then one of the giant screens flashed again. For half a second, a blueprint appeared before disappearing into static. Ethan's expression changed immediately. Not panic. Recognition. Vivian noticed. What is it? She asked quietly. Ethan did not answer at first. He kept staring toward the screen while the broken image replayed briefly again. Lines of processor architecture. Adaptive mobility sequencing. Military-grade energy routing. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. That is my design. Vivian blinked. What? Ethan stepped forward slightly. The processor architecture. I built the original framework 12 years ago. Before Vivian could respond, another wave of system failures rolled through the ballroom. The lights dimmed again. Several investors stood up anxiously. Daniel grabbed the microphone tighter. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. But calm was already disappearing. Then suddenly the ballroom speakers emitted a sharp burst of feedback before every screen in the room rebooted at once. The Mercer Automotive logo vanished completely. In its place appeared a single archived patent file dated 11 years earlier. Creator, Ethan Brooks. The ballroom went dead silent. Every conversation stopped. Even the waiters stood frozen beneath the chandeliers. Daniel's face lost all color. Vivian slowly turned toward Ethan. The screen changed again. Technical schematics scrolled upward beside military certification documents and engineering contracts connected to a defense mobility division long dissolved years ago. More files appeared automatically. Processor intelligence models. Hybrid routing systems. Adaptive vehicle learning architecture. Every single one carried the same name. Ethan Brooks. Gasps rippled quietly through the crowd. One older executive stepped closer to the screen in disbelief. That is impossible, he whispered. Another murmured. Those systems became the foundation for half the industry. Daniel stepped toward the control booth furiously. Shut it down. But nobody moved quickly enough. The final file appeared larger than all the others. Transfer of ownership. Sold in full for medical treatment authorization. Beneath it sat Ethan's signature dated 4 years before his wife died. Silence swallowed the ballroom whole. Not humiliation. Not gossip. Reverence. The kind of silence people fall into when truth suddenly becomes too heavy for noise. Ethan stood motionless near the back of the room while hundreds of strangers stared at him differently now. Not as the mechanic. Not as the poor single father from a small Nebraska town. But as the man whose ideas quietly shaped an industry while he disappeared to save the woman he loved. Vivian's eyes filled slowly as she looked at him. Daniel Mercer opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. And somewhere beneath the crystal lights and polished marble floors, the balance of the entire room shifted forever. No one in the ballroom seemed willing to breathe first. Crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, while the giant screens continued displaying Ethan Brooks's name in silent, undeniable proof. The soft clink of a champagne glass somewhere near the back of the room sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. Daniel Mercer stood near the stage gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles had turned pale beneath the lights. But the confidence that had carried him all evening was gone now. Investors no longer looked at him. Reporters no longer pointed cameras toward the Mercer logo. Every eye in the ballroom had shifted toward the quiet man standing beside his daughter near the back wall. Ethan looked uncomfortable with the attention, almost like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Lucy looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy," she whispered softly, "you built all this?" Ethan looked down at her and smiled faintly. "Not exactly. But everybody looks at you like a superhero." Ethan gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Real heroes usually do not get ballrooms. Vivian felt her chest tighten hearing that. She stepped slowly toward the stage while hundreds of executives watched in complete silence. Her heels clicked softly across the marble floor, steady and deliberate. When she reached the microphone, even the reporters lowered their cameras slightly. Vivian looked out over the room for a long moment before speaking. "I have spent most of my life around powerful people," she said quietly. "Men who measured worth by stock prices, headlines, and applause." The ballroom remained perfectly still. Vivian turned slowly toward Ethan. But the strongest man in this room was the only one who never needed recognition. Several people lowered their eyes immediately. Daniel's expression hardened, but he said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Vivian continued softly. While others chased empires, he gave away his own to buy more time with the woman he loved and to raise the little girl standing beside him. Lucy squeezed Ethan's hand tighter. Across the ballroom, one elderly investor quietly removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. Another executive slowly began clapping. Then another. Then another. The applause spread carefully at first, almost reverently, until the entire ballroom stood together beneath the chandeliers. Not loud, not wild, respectful, emotional. The kind of applause reserved for people who reminded others what goodness actually looked like. Ethan looked overwhelmed by it all. He leaned closer to Lucy. "I think we should head home, Bug." Lucy nodded sleepily against his side. Ethan turned quietly toward the exit before Vivian stepped down from the stage and reached gently for his hand. The applause softened again around them. Ethan looked at her with calm surprise. Vivian's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "You spent years fixing broken machines," she said softly. "But you never realized you were healing people too." For the first time since she met him, Ethan did not immediately look away. Outside the towering ballroom windows, snow had begun falling over Lincoln in slow drifting silence. White flakes spiraled beneath the city lights like tiny pieces of grace descending through the dark. Ethan glanced toward the windows, then back at Vivian. "I never wanted any of this attention." Vivian smiled gently through damp eyes. "That is why you deserved it." Somewhere near the stage, Daniel Mercer quietly stepped away from the crowd and disappeared through a side exit without a word. Nobody noticed him leave. Nobody cared, because some moments become too honest for arrogance to survive inside them. Ethan finally looked down at Lucy sleeping against his arm, then back toward the ballroom filled with strangers still standing in quiet respect. And slowly, almost reluctantly, the tired mechanic from Pine Hollow smiled. Not the guarded smile of a man surviving grief. Not the polite smile he wore for customers. A real one. Warm. Peaceful. The kind of smile that only appears when someone finally realizes the world still has room for kindness after all.